Hi, I'm Lauren Ball. I'm the author of Where's the One About the Bobcat? It's an index of all of Patrick McManus' stories. So if you own all of the books, but you can't remember which one your favorite story is in, this will help you find it. And I've got a website, the McManusIndex.com, where I help people find their favorite stories. I'm going to read a story to you, A Good Deed Goes Wrong. This is found in the book Real Ponies. Real Ponies Don't Go Oink. And this is one of the most famous stories of Patrick McManus. This is the one about the toboggan run and the bobcat. So here we go. A Good Deed Goes Wrong. Some people thought Crazy Eddie Muldoon and I were to blame for breaking Rancid Crabtree's leg. Oddly, the odorous and crotchety old woodsman himself was one of the people who thought this. He said, as soon as he got off his crutches, he intended to run Eddie and me down and whale the tar out of us. We weren't too worried. We figured by the time Rancid got out of the cast, he would have cooled off enough to see that the accident was really his own doing and no fault of ours. But before he got off his crutches, the little incident with the bobcat occurred, generally confusing matters even more. As Crazy Eddie observed at the time, you try to do a good deed for a person, and it just gets you into more trouble. Anyway, here are the true facts about the entire mess. During our Christmas vacation from third grade, Eddie and I built a toboggan run up on the mountain behind Rancid's shack. The design of our run was based on one we had seen in newsreels at the Pandora Theater the Saturday before. The two runs were almost identical, except ours was steeper and faster than the one in the newsreel, and went over and under logs and had brush on both sides of it, and at least one of the turns was much sharper. And if you didn't make that turn, you would be shot off into space and sail for some time over the valley, looking down at the tiny cows and cars beneath you. And this in turn might elevate your anxiety to a dangerous level. So you want to be sure to make that sharp curve. We built the first part of the run on an old logging road that zigzagged down the mountain. We tramped up and down the road the distance of 2 switchbacks, packing down the snow into a track slightly wider than the width of our sled. The grade on the switchbacks was modest, but sufficient to build up a fair head of speed in a sled by the time it and its driver reached the curve at the end of the second switchback. Then came the good part. Instead of curving the track onto the next switchback, we funneled it over the edge of the road into an old skid trail. The skid trail had been gouged into the mountain by old-time loggers, dragging logs down it. In fact, it was so steep they probably didn't have to drag the logs, but merely had to roll them into it and let them shoot to the bottom of the mountain. Erosion had cut the trail down to bare rock, which was now coated with ice, making it even better for a toboggan run. When we were building up our curved bank to funnel the track into the skid trail, Eddie slipped and nearly shot down the run with nothing but his body, and would have if he hadn't managed to grab a small tree and pull himself back up. Wow, he said, this is going to be good. At the bottom end, the skid trail intersected with the next switchback of the road. This was where the toboggan driver would shoot off into space if he failed to make the turn onto the switchback. Fortunately, there was a high bank on the downhill side of the road, only slightly offset from the track. The driver would have to be alert enough to steer toward the high bank, which would sweep the sled up and around and then redirect it back down into the switchback. This was the last switchback, and it provided a straightaway that, at the bottom, merged with the Sand Creek Road. The straightaway was quite steep, so the toboggan driver wouldn't have to worry about his speed diminishing any when he hit that last stretch. He could then glide to a gradual stop on the Sand Creek Road, which was seldom traveled during winter, and even then only by old Mrs. Swisher, who drove to church on it each Sunday. We completed the track on a Friday and planned to make our first test run on Saturday. The next morning, Crazy Eddie and I were dragging my sled past Rancid Shack on our way up to test our toboggan run, and were arguing about who got to go down it first. "Listen, Eddie, it's my sled," I said. "Yeah, that's right," he replied. "That's why you should get to be the first to test the run." "No, sirree," I said. "I should be the one who gets to choose who goes first, and I choose you." About then, Rancid stuck his head out the door of his shack. "What you boys up to now?" he hollered at us. "Some kind of monkey business, no doubt. I ain't never seen no young'uns what could get into more trouble than you two." "We built a toboggan run up on the mountain, just like in the newsreel, Rancid. It's fast, too." "Hold up a sec," he said, putting on his coat. "I better go check this out. You fool half-pints probably invented some new way to kill yourselves." Half an hour later, we stood at the start of the toboggan run, all of us still puffing great clouds of vapor from the climb up the trail. Rancid stared at the little track going down the first switchback. It didn't look nearly so impressive this morning. "Shoot," he said, chuckling. "You call this a toboggan run? I can't believe I clumb all the way up here to see this peddling little trail in the snow. I must have been out of my mind. Give me that sled. Least you can do is let me ride back to the bottom of the mountain on it." I handed over the sled. Rancid plopped down on it, sitting upright with his long legs sticking way out in front, his coat completely concealing the sled beneath him. "It might be dangerous, Mr. Crabtree," Eddie warned. "Dangerous?" Rancid said. "Eddie, I expect I never told you, but I used to be a professional bobsledder, just like you see in the movies. Racin' Rancid, they used to call me." "Gee, I didn't know that," I said. I figured that he must have been a professional bobsledder right after being a fighter pilot and before he became a big game hunter in Africa, or about the same time he was a champion prize fighter. "Yep," Rancid said, poking a wad of chewing tobacco into his cheek. "Now give me a shove off." He glided slowly away toward the first curve, gradually picking up speed. He called back to us as he went around the curve. "I hate to tell you this, boys, but your bobsled track ain't steep enough even to give a feller a decent ride." We were disappointed in the professional bobsledder's assessment of our run, but thought his opinion of it might improve later on. Sure enough, the next time we heard him yell was about when we thought he should hit the funnel into the skid trail. "God dang!" "I think he liked the skid trail section," Eddie said. "Yeah," I said. He sounded excited. So that is how Rancid broke his leg. He said later he didn't know when, where, or how he broke his leg, or even that he had, because his mind was so occupied with other matters, among which was whaling the tar out of Eddie and me at the first opportunity. The only eyewitness other than Rancid was old Mrs. Swisher, who was a little daft anyway and really couldn't be relied on for an accurate observation. "I got a little mixed up," she related, and thinking it was Sunday instead of Saturday, I started driving to town to go to church. As always, I was especially nervous going by that dreadful Rancid Crabtree shack, because he's in cahoots with the devil. Well, I'm driving along real careful, minding my own business, when all of a sudden that fool Crabtree zooms right by me, just flying he was about a foot in the air, going like the wind. I just caught a glimpse of his face. He was going so fast, and I'm sorry I did, because it had such a hideous expression on it you can't even imagine. The thought of it has kept me awake nights ever since. And he's holding this little green tree in one hand, torn right out by the roots it was. I bet the tree had something to do with one of those devilish rights of his. Well, he shot off down Sand Creek Hill, and I thought he might be laying an ambush for me up ahead, so I turned right around and went home. And it was a good thing I did, too, because then I remembered it was Saturday instead of Sunday. Naturally, nobody took daft old Mrs. Swisher's account seriously, although Eddie and I did recover my sled at the bottom of Sand Creek Hill, where it had shot off over the bank and landed on the frozen creek. Sprayed out in front of it was what we first thought to be blood, but then discovered was nothing more interesting than tobacco juice. A couple of Saturdays later, Eddie and I were walking along the highway, pulling my sled, the runners of which were somewhat splayed out, but still worked. We'd been trying to come up with an idea for making amends with Rancid when we saw a furry shape lying on the highway. Both of us had fine roadkill collections, and this specimen looked exceptional. "It's mine," I said as we rushed forward. "You got the last one." "No, sirree," Eddie said. "I remember. You got that nice flattened toad last fall. And, hey, what is this anyway?" "My gosh, it's a bobcat. Feel it. It must have just been killed. It's still warm. Look, it's got a bit of blood on its head where the car hit it, but otherwise it's in great shape." "Well, I better take my bobcat home. Maybe I'll stuff it." "No, you won't," Eddie said. "I'm going to take it home and stuff it." "Hey, wait a minute," I said. "I know what. We'll give it to Rancid. He can skin it and sell the hide. Then he won't be mad at us anymore. What do you say, Eddie?" Eddie reluctantly agreed. We loaded the bobcat on my sled and hauled it over to Rancid's shack. I pushed the door gently open and peeked inside to make sure Rancid wasn't close enough to swat me before he saw we had brought him a gift. The old woodsman was still in bed, snoring loudly, his casted foot sticking out from under the covers and resting on a block of firewood. He had pulled a red wool stocking cap over his bare foot, where it stuck out of the cast. "Rancid's still asleep," I whispered to Eddie. "Should we wake him up?" Crazy Eddie grinned. "Nah, he's probably all pooped out from dragging that cast around with him. Let's just carry the bobcat in and put it on the table next to his bed so he can see it when he first wakes up. It'll be a nice surprise for him." Eddie was very good at thinking up nice surprises for people. We carried the bobcat in and laid it down on the table next to the snoring Rancid. Eddie studied the arrangement. "No good," he whispered. "It looks too dead." He looked around and found a box of kitchen matches. Then he took out 2 of the matches and used them to prop apart the big cat's lips in a pretty fair imitation of a snarl. Then he stuck the matchbox under the animal's chin so it looked as if the bobcat were holding its head up, ready to spring. Then we tiptoed out and hunkered alongside the door to await the old woodsman's awakening. "I think he's going to be real surprised," Eddie said. "Yeah, me too." Presently, Rancid stopped snoring. He muttered something in his sleep. Then he apparently banged at the table with his arm because we heard a bump, and then the sound of the matchbox hitting the floor. "Darn," Eddie whispered. "The matchbox fell out from under the bobcat's chin. The surprise is ruined now." "What was that?" Rancid mumbled. "What in tarnation? God, dang, get away from me!" Eddie and I chuckled. The table crashed to the floor. A chair was flung against the wall, and a block of firewood sailed out the door. All of this was accompanied by a terrible roaring and snarling and the wildest cussing I'd ever heard. Get back! Get back!" Rancid yelled amid all the bangs and crashes and thumps. Eddie looked at me. I didn't think he'd be this surprised. "No fooling," I said nervously. "Maybe we'd better leave right now. We can tell him later about our present for him when he isn't so surprised." At that moment, there was a furious rattling of crutches, and Rancid burst out of the cabin, shot across the yard and into his privy, slamming the door shut behind him. Eddie and I were so startled we couldn't move. Then the bobcat walked out the door, chewing on a matchstick. He gave us a contemptuous glance and went off up the mountain shaking its head, either because it had a headache or because it couldn't believe what it had just witnessed. Rancid opened the privy door a crack and watched the bobcat until it disappeared in the woods. Then he saw us. Crazy Eddie and I started toward home. "You ever seen Rancid move that fast before?" Eddie asked. "Nope," I said, glancing back over my shoulder, "especially not on crutches." "I didn't even use his legs," Eddie said with a touch of awe. "Had those old crutches whipping around like spokes on a wheel. You think he was ever an acrobat in a circus?" "Probably." "Yeah, I see he don't sleep in pajamas neither," Eddie said, puffing clouds of vapor into the icy air. "Yeah," I said, panting my own clouds of vapor. "He probably will after this, though." We passed daft old Mrs. Swisher's car askew on the road below Rancid's shack. She was staring vacantly at us, her mouth hanging open. "It's Saturday, Mrs. Swisher," Eddie yelled as we sped past. "Sunday ain't till tomorrow." She didn't reply, but I could tell she was going to have trouble getting to sleep again that night. It isn't often you see a naked man on crutches with a red stocking cap on his foot chase two boys through the snow on a cold winter morning. What was even stranger, the crippled old woodsman kept gaining on us. And that's the end. Thanks for listening. Go ahead and subscribe, and I'll let you know when I put up another story. Check out the McManus Index. Join the community of Patrick McManus fans there. So thanks.